welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap that exists between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 113, we're joined again by Dr. Renee Rogers. You might remember Dr. Rogers from episode 60 when we had her on to talk about coaching and coaching skills. This conversation is going to be a different conversation and a very relevant conversation. We're talking to Dr. Rogers about her perspective on the anti-obesity medications and what these mean for exercise professionals. This is Dr. Rogers' area of research at KU Medical Center, and she's going to bring up in the conversation, she does research with another preeminent researcher in the field, Dr. John Jakicic, who's also been a guest on the Wellness Paradox. And this conversation is a little bit more directed than the conversation we had in episode 109 of the podcast, where we talk generally about the anti-obesity medications. This conversation is going to be based on an article that Dr. Rogers and Dr. Jakicic wrote for the American College of Sport Medicine on challenges and opportunities for exercise professionals with the anti-obesity medications. I think this is an amazing conversation because it really gets at the heart of how we can look at these medications as a fitness professional and an exercise professional community as an opportunity that we could take advantage of and be a part of, rather than an issue that we somehow have to thwart. So I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation with Dr. Rogers. Very engaging, and most importantly, I think very, very informative. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 113. Please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Renee Rogers. Today, we're delighted to be joined again by Dr. Renee Rogers. Renee, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I'm so excited to be back.
And you were on episode 60, which seems like a lifetime ago, but it wasn't that long ago, even though we're on episode 113 now. But before we launch into this discussion today, which I think everyone's going to be really excited about, can you just remind our audience a little bit about your background to give them some context for the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I always say I'm a little bit non-traditional, but I think it's actually helped me find my way. And it's not been a straight line by any means. So anyone on your professional trajectories, please know straight lines aren't always the best professional path. I tell everyone that. But I actually thought for many years and studied intensely, as a child, through adolescence, through, high school, I was going to be a professional dancer. That was my passion, my space, everything that I wanted to do. And after being out in the field for a period of time and realizing, wow, this is a tough life. I knew I loved to move, but I also knew that, it was time to move on. But at that point, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew I loved moving and dancing. But personally, I had a lot of questions around, health and well-being and weight management, especially in my field. And so, one day when I was at, Youngstown State University, just kind of strolling through aimlessly, a new undergrad, I walked through the Department of Exercise Science and was like, oh, what's that? And it clicked. And I found exercise as a passion. So, I studied to be, an exercise scientist, actually trained to be a physical therapist originally, decided I didn't want to go the license path with PT, went into medical fitness space as an exercise scientist, and really spent, about 3 years working in the field and helping initially a lot of people on their weight loss journeys, and very quickly realized I did not know as much as I needed to and needed some additional training. So that's when I actually went to the University of Pittsburgh and studied under the mentorship of John Jakicic. Dr. Jakicic's exceptional in the space of obesity, weight management, and the role of physical activity, who I am lucky enough to still work with today as a really, really good colleague and do research with to this day. So spent a lot of time working on large scale behavioral weight loss interventions that were primarily lifestyle based for many, many years. Spent some time developing interventions in the space of bariatric surgery and lifestyle and combination. And now moving more into the space of really trying to understand these very powerful and effective anti-obesity medications that are now out, and what the role of lifestyle is from a biological and a behavioral standpoint, so we can really build good interventions.
Yeah, and that brings us very much to kind of the present day conversation. I think everyone who's in the world of obesity research is asking some of these similar questions. And you and I have had conversations about this. You gave a great presentation at the Medical Fitness Association National Conference in October about this, and kind of in part sparked my thought for this podcast. Now, we did cover the anti-obesity medications on a kind of a more clinical level in episode 109. This conversation is going to be more around the specific implications for the exercise professional. But in case some people haven't listened to episode 109, can you just kind of provide a high-level overview of what these very powerful and potent medications do?
Absolutely. And, I'll give that disclaimer. Everything I'm going to say is in general, right? Because they are from a high level standpoint, which we're going for the sake of time, they are complex. And we have to remember that just like obesity is a complex disease, understanding pharmacotherapy is also quite complex. So, really look at your resources in terms of if you're seeking more information, who you're going to really look for resources from qualified clinicians. But in general, it's important to remember that these medications have actually been around for almost 15 plus years. They were originally developed for type 2 diabetes. And what ended up happening is as they were studied, we found that patients taking them were also losing weight. So additional clinical trials were put forward, and they started to be studied and approved then later, certain ones down the line, for use for weight management. But I should say clearly, specifically for obesity care, not for quick weight loss. And that's one of the big misconceptions out there, and unfortunately misuses of a lot of the medications right now. But in general, I like to summarize it to say that, the typical, eat less, move more is the framework that we like to use when we talk about weight loss or obesity management. And when it comes to these medications, they're really acting on the eat less side of the equation. They're not magically going to help you move more, which is, good for us in the physical activity field, but also creates some new challenges and opportunities. But to understand how this works, essentially, is we talk about the mechanism, and the original, science named it, its breakthrough of the year is GLP-1. And essentially this is glucagon-like polypeptide 1, and these are called receptor agonists. And basically what they do is they mimic what we call nutrient stimulated hormones in the body. And they actually act on the receptor in the brain, and they help you feel longer. And they also have the ability to slow gastric emptying. So in turn, someone doesn't eat as much throughout their day. So helping with the eat less side of the equation. And if it's specifically targeting GLP-1 that I mentioned, the most popular medication right now is semaglutide. That's the big boy on the block. Semaglutide produces about double the weight loss of its predecessor, liraglutide. That's why Ozempic, which is what it originally was, but that's for type 2 diabetes. The correct for weight loss is Wegovy, technically. That was the first one that really caught everybody's attention. Now, the new kid on the block is tirzepatide. And tirzepatide is different from semaglutide because it doesn't just target GLP-1, it also targets GIP, or glucose-dependent insulin-tropic polypeptide. Sorry, stumble over it every single time I say it, no matter what. But because we're now targeting two of the receptors of nutrient-stimulated hormones, we're seeing tirzepatide is actually producing even more weight loss than semaglutide. So there's two powerful agents, and by trade name, tirzepatide is known as Zepbound. Mm-hmm. There's a lot there, I know.
There is a lot, and this is not a pharmacology lecture, so I think that's a good starting point. And I think well, basically these work on the satiety mechanism, and I think at this point probably many people listening have heard a lot of the stories of people who have used these and are literally not constantly thinking about food like they have been their entire life. So, there's another separate conversation that we won't have today about how I do really think this changes people's perception. At least I hope it changes their perception around what it means to deal with obesity. And it's not just a willpower issue. There is a biological element to it.
Absolutely. There really is. It's much more complex than that. And for some people, that extra help to exactly what you said, the biological underpinnings of it is really, patients will tell you straight up, it's life-changing. The food noise is gone. Like you said, I love it when they say the food noise. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not constantly thinking about food. I may have just been eating and I'm planning my next meal. That's gone. So we've created a space now for some people to be able to focus on all the other health benefits. And as you mentioned, let go of the idea that this is about willpower.
Yeah, and getting into that, obviously, as these medications started to become more popular, certainly a lot of people in the fitness space, the exercise space, had opinions very, very quickly of this. Some people were certainly threatened by this because as a field, we have been part of the behavioral and lifestyle interventions for weight loss. Now, granted, depending on what part of the field you're talking about, certainly to varying degrees of success. And I was kind of waiting for the evidence-based space to come out with a really good synopsis of kind of how we should be thinking of this as a field of exercise professionals. And you mentioned Dr. Jakisik earlier, who we've also had as a guest on the podcast. And both you and Dr. Jakisik wrote this great article for the American College of Sport Medicine on kind of the opportunities and the challenges with these medications. And I read the article and I thought, man, every exercise professional needs to hear what's being said in this article, because I didn't think it was, combative like some people had been. I also didn't think it was Pollyannish in the sense that, hey, nothing's going to change and exercise is still important, because the reality is things are changing. So I want to unpack that article a little bit. And I want to start with the challenges that you talked about in that article. And then, we'll end on the more positive note of opportunities. So let's start with the challenges.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for reading that. And, Dr. Jakisik and I were trying to be very thoughtful about it. So I appreciate, what you took from it as well. And I mean, challenges are abundant, and it's no reason, you're correct, to be defensive or feel as though, this isn't a great space, but we do need to be realistic. These medications are here to stay. And as I looked this morning before we started our podcast, if you look at stat tracking, you'll see that there's about 70 plus agents currently in development, some of which may be even more, impactful on weight loss and different methods for taking it. So I think they're here to stay. So we want to really, really focus in on that and what that means. And the bottom line is patients taking these medications is a first challenge to us. They're losing a significant amount of weight without engaging in physical activity. And so, and what's, I think, interesting to note from this relationship is when we look at some of the best, and I can quote some of Dr. Jakisik's studies on this, some of the ones I've been lucky enough to work on, we look at the best, most rigorous lifestyle interventions, even beyond the DPP and look ahead, but ones that have really focused in with physical activity. We see on average, one of our most recent clinical trials, diet and exercise changes alone, upwards of 250 minutes a week. So really following those guidelines, we see on average 10% reduction in body weight. And again, weekly meetings, all in, physical activity motivation to the highest level, primarily aerobic exercise. That's what we're seeing. With semaglutide, you're seeing approximately 15% weight loss at 68 to 72 weeks. And with tirzepatide, you're now seeing upwards of 20% or more at the same amount of time frame. So you have to put that in perspective right there. Now, they had what I like to call a lifestyle, maybe light program associated, where they're encouraged to eat better. They're encouraged to be physically active, maybe not the same amount of rigor as what we would have done on those clinical trials. But still, right? Even with lifestyle, quote unquote, life, we saw 5 to 10% more weight loss sustained out across a year. And more studies are starting to come out for longer duration, where we're seeing that as long as people stay on this medication, they maintain that weight loss. Now, if they come off of it, they do start to regain because hunger signaling comes back. So we're going to see people lose weight, even with a very mild to moderate lifestyle program attached to it. That's a really big first challenge that we need to consider. Also, another challenge is that it will improve many of the health parameters in their body without engaging in physical activity. So, the main trial, we had a huge trial that recently came out that showed a reduction in hard cardiovascular events and outcomes from taking semaglutide over a period of time. We're talking heart attack, stroke, even mortality cause of death at the end of the day. from taking these medications. So not only are they helpful for type 2 diabetes, but we're seeing really good cardiovascular implications, and additional health parameters are being improved. Honestly, I just saw the other day, there's probably, 5 to 10 clinical trials going on right now for other conditions that we can be studying and look at these medications in. So I think we're going to keep hearing more coming down the pike. And I think the last challenge, that maybe one of the most important ones as we go forward and accept this new reality, is that, in a lot of the work that I'm doing right now to try to understand how patients feel about physical activity taking these medications, because I truly believe it's hard to intervene until we really know how people feel. We shouldn't jump the gun too quickly. So I've been doing a lot of qualitative interviews with patients. And one of the things that they're saying to me is, Renee, I've been there and done that when it comes to physical activity. I've done the workout programs. I've lost weight using physical activity, and I've also regained it back. I know it works, but it doesn't work long-term for me, or it's a lot for me to exercise at the volume that you're asking me to. And now that I'm taking this medication, it's not that I don't think physical activity is important. I know that. Everyone's told me that for years. But I'm just not sure how much it's helping me with weight loss. And that creates this space, this gap for us to say, okay, we have some work to do. We have to reframe. We don't need to be talking about calories burned and, how we do these programs. Maybe we need to shift the way we talk about the value we're going to get out of it, because if you look way back to the very low calorie studies that we did for weight loss that incorporated both physical activity, and like we're talking low calorie diets, physical activity or adding exercise in didn't actually add in more weight loss. And I'm a little concerned that with semaglutide and tirzepatide being as powerful as they are, the assumption that just by exercising is going to cause them to burn even more calories, which is going to cause in turn more weight loss. I think these agents just may be a little too powerful, because I would imagine if we start to really count how many calories people are eating on these meds, it looks very similar to those very low calorie diets. Now, earlier iterations of these medications like liraglutide, we did see additional weight loss when you added exercise. But again, semaglutide and tirzepatide, 15 to 20% weight loss, that changes the game. So assuming exercise is going to add more weight loss, or selling it that way, may be a little bit of an issue. And I think our patients that are taking these meds are already thinking about that. They're already, asking those questions.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And, you're only going to be able to lose weight at such a rate when the rate is so rapid. And I think, I've said, personally for years that, being on the weight loss bandwagon for exercise was, that's where we were fighting a losing battle in the first place with that. And now that's really right in front of us. And as you said, these challenges are real. I think I saw something that Denmark is changing the way they calculate their GDP because Novo Nordisk is making so much money from these medications. So, obviously, these are here to stay. And I think, the challenges that you just mentioned are very real. But as you and Dr. Jaquiz talked about in that article, this does present some, tremendous opportunities for us if we embrace this as an opportunity. Yeah, so absolutely. that's really where I want to spend our time is, how do we embrace this as an opportunity as a community of exercise professionals?
Absolutely. And I mentioned, the eat less, move more paradigm, again, for basic weight loss. Absolutely. Right. And I would still encourage that as being a starting point for someone. However, if you're working with somebody that has been diagnosed with obesity, that is working with a clinician that has, they've been on a journey, it's not our place, first and foremost, to say, hey, you should be on a weight loss medication, anti-obesity medication. That is for a clinician to decide and then refer to you. Let's be really clear on that. There's some compound, issues with compounds, negative side effects, lots of things there. We really want to leave the decision making around pharmacotherapy to, a clinician, preferably an obesity, specialist that's doing this work. But, as far as once we have a client come to us or we get a referral from one of those clinicians and someone has said, I am on these medications, first and foremost, our opportunity is to say, welcome in, I'm here to help you, not you don't need to be on that medication. That's the first thing. We really need to be embracing this opportunity, embracing the clients that are coming to us and really looking to build great partnerships. That's so important with all of this. But the first opportunity that I think we really have, and I'm actually most excited about this one, is we can get back to person-centered care when it comes to exercise prescriptions. The physical activity guidelines for weight loss, for weight management came out knowing before these agents were ever around and were ever this powerful, right? They were there to help us understand that if someone is using lifestyle only, the dose needs to look this big, which was huge, right? Up to upwards of 225 to 250 minutes a week to get to the point of losing 1 to 2 pounds and sustaining it long term. So those doses are big. It's mostly been based, the evidence, on aerobic, although we know resistance training may have some impact in energy expenditure as well. But what we found over the years is those are hard, even in our weight loss interventions. Getting people to stay and maintain those levels, it's a lot of work on both sides of the equation. And we don't get people to do it for the long term always. Some people do, and they do it very successfully, but it isn't for everyone. And we also know that the longer we restrict calories and create this energy deficit, the body wants to go back up to that set point and continuously fight. So that's where that struggle becomes very real. We don't have to program that way anymore. We can potentially start to get back to dropping that and focusing in on what we do know is the health benefits at 150 minutes per week. We can be prioritizing the space, the food noise that is gone. We can now spend on helping people actually engage in physical activity because those behaviors are still critically important for improving health in patients taking anti-obesity medications. And I think it's also really important for us now to take a step back and say, what do these patients need? And, there's a lot of information out there. And one of the areas of research from the biological standpoint that I'm also working on is understanding what is happening to lean mass. And in general, right now, when you look at the data from the large, the STEP and the SURMOUNT trials, it looks like it's somewhere upwards of 15%, or even, 25 to 40% lean mass loss on these medications, and some may be, doing a little bit better than others. However, I always like to point this out, and I think it's really important. Anytime you lose weight, you lose lean mass. There's no question about it because you're not carrying all that excess, adiposity, and you don't need as much lean mass to support yourself. But we need to remember that lean mass means more than just muscle. Saying lean mass and muscle mass and calling them the same thing is not actually correct. In terms of body composition, muscle mass is only one component of lean mass, which includes water, bone, organs. We can't forget organ tissue and also connective tissue. So a lot of fitness professionals out there right now are saying things like, okay, people are losing all this muscle mass taking these medications, so we need to do resistance training. And I'll caution you and say, we need to prescribe resistance training for all the reasons that we already know. It's important for function, strength, quality of life, activities of daily living. We all know this already. We don't know yet the dose, whether or not that'll completely, reduce lean mass loss. I can tell you from go back to the very low calorie study diets, right? When we resistance train, it doesn't preserve lean mass loss, but it does improve quality. It improves tissue quality. So we know that even if you lose mass, muscle, lean, whatever we say in this case, we can improve quality by resistance training. So this opens this new door to say, if people are losing this, we can at least improve quality so they don't lose strength, they don't lose physical function. And honestly, when I talk to patients about this, one of the main things they're telling me is they feel weaker on these medications. Is it directly related to the mass loss? I don't know. We don't exactly know that yet. We're literally measuring muscle, lean mass now, and the role of exercise in some clinical trials that we're doing. But that's such a great target we can focus in on. Back to strength, back to physical function, and all the other health parameters. We also hear patients telling us that they feel fatigued. So what a great reason to start to talk to them about the cardiorespiratory benefits of aerobic exercise and how we can help with those feelings and really prescribe exercise by talking to the person and saying, how do you feel? What do you need? I want to write a program that makes you feel your best while you're taking this. And remembering that every patient's going to be a little bit different. The side effects they experience, how they're affected, whether they exercise before, whether they have a, a comorbidity, co-condition, other things that are going on. So there's so much opportunity to get back to what we love and really look at, the person and what they need and how they feel about all of that. I think that's an important thing. But the last point that I'll make in terms of the opportunity is really supporting patients on their holistic weight loss journey. We can really be there for them by programming for them, which relates to my last point. And I also think this brings us to the table in a more valuable way as an integrated part of healthcare teams that are treating patients with obesity.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that you said in the piece with Dr. Jakisik, and you also said when you were talking at MFA, was this idea how it frees up the individual to not have to be constantly focusing on their nutrition challenges so they can turn themselves to other things that they want to do with their life. And I also think that that's very similar to what this is doing for the exercise professional. Now it frees us up from having to work on something that is really not in our scope of practice directly in the first place, and now allows us to get back to the reasons that we started to do this in the first place. So it's an amazing opportunity to kind of reframe, I think, the way we've thought about working with individuals with obesity over the years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It really, really is. And I can tell you firsthand from, being a part of these lifestyle interventions, you get on a phone call with someone and you'd have 30 minutes. And as much as you wanted to talk about physical activity, you have, not just reducing how much you eat, but changing the quality of the food that you're eating, and also the barriers and the life and the emotional, all the aspects that go in with behavior change around eating, which is quite complex. Sometimes, that physical activity gets pushed a little bit to the side. So I know how much mental space it can take up for a person, but as a coach, I also know how much you wish you could intervene more. So I think you're right on point in saying that, we can do more of what we love and really, really help folks connect with physical activity and use some of that mental space and those behavior change strategies to make better connections with a physically active life.
Yeah. And it's also clear that the research on this is evolving at a breakneck pace. I mean, you mentioned the research that you're doing that's actually looking at, and I think this is such an important point to not conflate lean mass and muscle mass and understanding what's actually happening. I am curious for the exercise professional that's listening to this, who's not a researcher like you, who's your head's down in this every day. How would you tell the just frontline exercise professional that's in the gyms every day how they should keep up on all this stuff? Where's a good place to go? Do you have any specific direction to point someone? I know that's a hard question to ask, and I'm partly asking for myself too, because there's so much.
Yeah. I know Dr. Jakisik and I are both really trying to get some resources out the door. I will say that. And, get some papers and some literature out there and trying to keep up with this space to inform through blogs and podcasts like this one, of course. But, I'll be really honest when I say that want to look to obesity specialists when you're looking for quotes, particularly about how the medications work, and understanding the true side effects. I think all the side effects can be reported, but we always need to remember that on average, some people experience them different. So when one person's opinion starts to come out in writings or in interviews that's taking a medication, it's great to hear those perspectives from people, but we need to realize that there's so much variability in it. So I'd strongly encourage people that are seeking information to be looking for articles and resources that are coming out from, certified obesity specialists in the space that are explaining it and talking about it. They're having to keep up with this information and for their patients. And I think they're going to be honest about side effects. Lots of medical professionals can prescribe. They are complex and they are ever evolving. So again, I bring you back to anytime you're looking for somebody with American Board of Obesity Medicine certification, they're likely a really good resource that's out there. That would be my first recommendation, but I promise more really good resources. We're trying to get more out the door, to really help. But the other thing that I'll say right now is, you can learn so much from the person standing in front of you, from your client, and hear what they have to say about how they feel on the medication, how, what's going on with them. And you're asking questions or learning this information to design your fitness program, not to counsel them, on what they're doing. If anything, if you hear something that gives you a red flag, you should be referring or counseling them to seek, go back and speak to their physician. But for the most part, there's so much variability in how people are and feel on these medications, and their doses titrate. And that's an important aspect for exercise professionals to understand, that while the label may say that titrate in these increments, the clinician and the patient are likely making decisions on when to ramp up the dose of the medication based upon how they tolerate it. It could be insurance coverage. There's a lot of different things. It's very complex in terms of it. But, knowing and keeping that clear line of communication and saying, hey, when's your medication going up? Maybe we don't want to increase your exercise that week. Let's let you get it in your system, see how you're feeling, or paying attention to side effects around injection days or how they're feeling. Those are the unique, nuanced questions that I think exercise professionals need to start to think about and ask their clients about. And every client's going to be a little bit different. So reading an article from a clinician isn't going to give you the same information as that person in front of you will. So taking the time to check in regularly, weekly even, understanding what's going on is going to be really important with these folks.
Yeah, that's such a critical point. I'm so glad you mentioned talking to the actual. Sometimes we forget about that, right? Like talk to the client. And the point of the potency of these medications, and the good side of the potency is obviously it's resulting in weight loss. The challenge with the potency is, as you said, there are side effects, there are gastric side effects. You're consuming fewer calories, so you're certainly fatigued, and these are all things that are going to affect each individual a little bit differently. It's not like we have solidified clinical exercise guidelines for what we're doing with this population. So we're almost building the bridge as we're crossing it. And I think having that conversation with your clients and your patients that are on these, fundamentally, that sounds like the most important research you can do.
Really, really it is. And I think that, going back to what we already know about, working with patients that may be carrying excess body weight, maybe body awareness and balance is a little different. We may need to ramp up physical activity, moderate increases. We don't need to pack these sessions in to be about burning as many calories as we possibly can. So, have to. So, go hard or go home, let go of it, right? We can really systematically ramp someone up, spread their activity out in a way that's much more feasible and enjoyable for them. And likely they're going to keep coming back on a regular basis because they're seeing physical activity differently now. It's not about that intense thing they used to have to do to burn calories. So again, that opportunity is so big and so good for us, but we really do need to be tuned into how they feel.
Yeah. I actually was going to ask you to give me a take-home message here, but I feel like that seems like a really good take-home message, being tuned into how they feel. But is there anything you would like to add to that take-home message for the exercise professionals that are listening to this with regard to the anti-obesity medications?
Yeah, and honestly, Mike, I think it goes back to what we talked about the last time I was on your podcast, in thinking about how we bridge the gap, right, with clinicians. And we have to let go of, I have the perfect method of weight loss for you. Remember that being a member of the comprehensive care teams means putting the best interest of the patient or the client first. Mm-hmm. And that will not only help the client see you as a partner on their weight loss journey, but help you build trust with other obesity clinicians and members of the referral team that are looking for, treating the patient in the best holistic way that they can. So let go of method and make it about the person.
Amen to that. Renee, where can people go if they want to find out about the work that you, Dr. Jakizik, everyone at KU is doing? Where's some good sources to direct them to?
Yeah, definitely check out, my LinkedIn profile, connect with me on there. I'm pretty active in sharing resources from a lot of my clinician colleagues. I'm lucky to be connected with a lot of, obesity physicians that we were talking about before, and as new things are coming out, helping to share them or sharing articles that they're also commented in that I feel like are nice resources. Whenever I see those, I like to share those on my page, across my page, and comment the relation of exercise. I'm also posting, any blogs or other things that I'm working on. And we do have some good, hopefully good resources for fitness professionals coming out soon, that'll allow you to have a little bit more info. So I'd say definitely check that out. And then if you're following or pay attention to the KUMC website, we regularly are posting content there as well.
Awesome. And we'll link up to your LinkedIn in the show notes page, also to the KU website and the show notes page. I can attest that Renee is a great resource for this. That's one of the reasons I love social media. I feel like I don't have to search PubMed anymore. I can just wait for my social media friends and connections to do the search for me, and then they post the articles. So we'll definitely link up to that. Renee, I have a feeling that this is probably not the last conversation that you and I are going to be having about this. I feel like there's probably going to be at least an annual, maybe even a twice annual conversation that we could have on this. So I really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise. We'll link up to all this on the show notes page. So Dr. Renee Rogers, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
Thanks, Mike. It was great being here today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Rogers as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a big difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you from today's episode can be found on the show notes page. That's by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 113. Please be on the lookout for our next episode when it drops in 2 weeks. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next, please be well.